breakout sessions, all those great topics on networking, critical thinking, presenting, working with others, organizing, managing your time. Those are all parts of your professional image and skill set, right? So focusing on improving within all those different areas is ultimately going to prepare you for success in college and in your career. And professionalism matters right now in college, of course, since the way you conduct yourself in your classes and with your classmates and instructors is all a part of your success here at Wake Tech. But it's going to become even more important once you transition into your career field. So that's why it's our focus today. Let's see. So we've got a lot of great stuff to share with you today on a whole variety of topics. And the whole presenting team is really excited just to be here and for you all to be with us too. And for now, we ask you that you just keep your mics muted. It seems like you guys are doing a great job with that. Thank you. But definitely do share in the chat whenever you have questions or comments or any ideas about what we're talking about as we progress through the presentation. We've got people monitoring the chat, and Jason and I will both be popping in there too. So let us know what you're thinking about. I think that the information as a whole will be even more beneficial for all of you if we can tailor it towards you and what you're thinking too. So definitely participate as we go through. All right, so let's get to it. So I'm going to skip right here about to what do employers say about professionalism. So first, it's those hard skills or technical skills that you're learning in college now and that you gain through your internships and job experience that prepare you for what you need to know for your career field, right? Super important things. And when you put those technical skills and experience on your resume, they help you get the interview. But once you meet potential employers for that job interview, that's when your professionalism and those soft skills start to really come into play. And it can be a lack of professionalism that can actually prevent you from getting a promotion or a raise. It can cost you a job or even prevent you from getting that job in the first place. And even though that sounds a little drastic, I was actually surprised to see some of these numbers. So let's look at them here. And it says that according to this job outlook study from last year done by the National Association of Colleges and Employers, 86.9% of employers rated professionalism as either very important or extremely important for newly hired college grads. Okay, so that makes sense, not too surprising. We probably understand that that's an important thing. But the kind of troublesome number came when employers were asked to rate the professionalism of those new college grads that they were hiring. And in that case, only 44.2% of employers rated recent grads as either very proficient or extremely proficient when it came to professionalism. Now, that's a big difference, right, between what employers want versus what they're getting from recent grads as new hires. So, but you can see by dedicating yourself to developing as a professional, it's something that's going to really give you an advantage over other recent grads entering the workforce. So that's what we're here to talk about today. So how do you develop professionalism? Well, the good news is that you all are doing it right now by attending this conference. You're here talking about professionalism with us. You're going to later go to those breakout sessions and learn all about those different soft skills. And by doing that, you are taking an important step to really becoming a well-qualified professional and preparing yourself for success. So let's start off our professional pep talk today by trying to define what we're really talking about when we are referring to this kind of vague term, professionalism, right? So think about this question. What does professionalism mean to you? And go ahead and drop some ideas for us in the chat. Maybe first thing that comes to your mind when you hear that word. What does that mean?
And no answer is right or wrong. So whatever professionalism means to you, just drop it into the chat. You know, if you're comfortable, you can unmute yourself and say, but that's completely up to you.
Yeah, for sure. At this point, feel free to unmute if you like, or drop those ideas in there.
So my idea of professionalism would be coming across more as someone who is kind of confident and kind of knows what they're doing in that field and can work well with others in the different fields of whatever your exact job is. Of course, it would vary a little bit from job to job.
Yeah, good point, Silas. Those are real good ideas there. I like that confidence about what you're doing. You can see professionalism, I think, is a lot of that attitude and working with others, I heard you say, which is an important part
Yeah,
for sure.
we see some in the chat, conducting yourself in a formal manner, well-mannered, you know, learning or using therapeutic communications, you know, having questions at ready. So yeah, those are all things that you know, can embody professionalism. Absolutely. So the agenda for today, what we're going to talk about, yeah, doing your job in the appropriate way. Yeah. So all of those things, learning, what's that, skinless and applause. Yeah. So all of these things are what we think about when we think about professionalism and what it actually means to you.
Yeah. Yeah,
If
you
you,
guys have some great ideas there. You're picking up on a lot of what is to come, so that is great. I'm glad you're here and ready with that. And I think one thing to think about real quick before we go on from this is why are so many college grads entering the workforce without that soft skill of professionalism? And I think you know, as we get started here today, just think about that transition from college to the professional world. And it's tough. It's different, right? Because in college we often participate more passively as students, right? We're listening to lectures, we're being told how to complete projects and we follow those instructions. We have our instructors and other resources available and get immediate feedback from those resources and interact with people in our classes who are, you know, at the same educational level, taking the same classes, often our friends. But when we transition to the workplace, we're often expected to work more independently, right? Without that immediate feedback. And sometimes with people who are very different from us. So it's just a different environment and different things are expected from us. So then you add in all the distractions of modern life, and right now, a society still dealing with effects from the pandemic, right? And there's a lot of barriers that we're up against today. But I think kind of knowing all of that, knowing the importance of it, knowing why it can be a challenge, then we can get our mindset to focus on how to grow into our best professional selves. So I think that's kind of the mindset we want you all to be here with and going forward with. And appreciate you sharing in the chat, and definitely continue to participate with us as we go through here, and we'll work out this big topic all together. But yeah, I'll kick it back to you, Jason, to go ahead into what our agenda is for today.
yeah. So yeah, there was a comment in the chat: conducting yourself in a manner that reflects a high level of maturity and responsibility and respect for others. Yes, that is one of the key things that we're going to touch on as well throughout the presentation, as far as what professionalism is. Some of the things, other things that we're going to touch on, meaning why does it matter? Those communication skills, the oral skills and written skills are going to be very important. How you know, portray yourself orally and written, you know, as you are communicating to others. Professional behaviors, things that you're going to do that can set you apart from others. Your interview skills, things of that nature, how you dressed, to the questions that you ask, to the research that you do during the interview or before the interview. Those things all embody professionalism. Another thing, because we are in the 21st century, we know that technology is, you can say, rules the world for the most part. So we're going to touch on how to properly use technology in a professional manner. And then lastly, we're going to talk about creating a professional plan of action that will embody all of these things that can help you perform professionally in your respective fields. So as we move on to the next slide, we're going to talk about what is professionalism. So a lot of good things were in the comments as far as what professionalism was, you know, learning skills and how to apply those knowledges, therapeutic communication, you know, respect for others. All of those things all make up professionalism. So when we think about that broad term of professionalism, it actually is a combination of more than one thing, which we all can see in the chat. So from responsibility, to integrity, to accountability, and to excellence, all of those things is what we envision when we talk about professionalism, right? Because integrity, knowing or being able to say what's right, right? Or accountability, taking responsibilities for your actions. All of those things are important, and it's going to help us communicate effectively in our prospective work field, right? And so having to communicate appropriately and effectively is also going to be important. That is important skill that will help the company as a whole move forward and be very productive, because we know the main point of any business, yes, we know that we want to, have customers and have that good rapport with customers, but the main goal of any business is to turn a profit, and how you are productive and how you communicate professionally with each other, with your consumers, with whatever your vendors or things of that nature, how you communicate with them will definitely transcend into how productive your business is, right? So we'll move on and we'll talk about the importance. So professionalism is important in the workplace, and it's still important. We know that throughout the pandemic, there was a lot of changes that happened, from individuals working from home and not going to the office. But professionalism in the workplace is still important now that the world is semi going back to what we consider to be somewhat normal, right? Because of this changing in this work environment, you always want to make sure that you're presenting yourself in the best way or the best qualities as possible, showing those best qualities, right? So you always want to be able to communicate effectively with your fellow coworkers, and you also want to display this professional behavior, even though we know that sometimes it can be a fine line sometimes between what is considered to be professional and what is not. You always want to keep in the back of your mind that regardless of the size of your business, how you behave professionally will ultimately determine the success for that particular business, right? So now we're going to move into, as we talked about communication, we're going to move into professional communication and what that means. So I'm going to turn it back over to my colleague, Justine, and she'll talk a little bit more about that.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jason. Yeah, good stuff about adding on to what you've all have said about the kind of what it means, and then great points about how important it is. Does anyone have anything else to add about importance, or the kind of the positive benefits that come from being professional, or the negative consequences that might happen if we don't pay attention to something like this? Feel free to put it in the chat. I see lots of good stuff here. And I like how Sarah says, feels like the goalposts are constantly moving, because I think that the key here is not just that you do this one thing, like now we tap the magic wand and we are professionals and now we're good, right? I think
Yeah.
it is a thing that you have to be able to adapt, which is our evening keynote about adaptability, and being able to change and adjust yourself in different situations or when different things are required of you, but definitely something that is in flux. So we'll talk about some of that today. But yes, thank you all for participating in the chat, and feel free to keep going in there as we move forward. And as Jason said, we will go into talking about professional communication. So here's some key ideas to think about as we're talking about professional communication and why that's important. But no matter which career field you are planning to enter, effective and professional communication is always required, right? And it's like our big topic of professionalism overall, where it's an important skill to practice while you're still in college too. One important consideration, as you see here, for professional communication is your audience, right? So who are you sending your messages to, whether written or verbal communication? So that may be, at work, employers or potential employers, supervisors, coworkers, clients, customers. But in college, you also have instructors and classmates, and that's a formal audience that you're communicating with there too. So something to think about, that this is your time to kind of practice that. So in both college and career, professional audiences require that you follow a certain set of formal writing or speaking rules, right? And you want to do that so that your messages are conveyed effectively. And a part of that is also thinking about your purpose. So what's your purpose in communication? That one sometimes I think we forget about. Of course, these things exist. You have an audience, you have a purpose, but if we don't think about it, then we don't frame our communication in the best possible way. But with purpose, you want to think, what's the goal that I'm trying to accomplish, right? So that you can do that effectively. And then finally, professional communication requires that you have an appropriate tone, a formal tone for these types of audiences. And doing all of this helps you convey your messages effectively. And this probably makes sense, and you've probably heard it before about these formal writing and speaking rules, right? Especially if you've had English class like we have. And you might think that you got this, you've got it down. But we're going to go back to that study from earlier, look at some numbers about communication here. So that Job Outlook study from last year, they found that 95.6% of employers and 96.8% of students rated communication as the most important competency for career success. Okay, so super important. Everyone's in agreement, both employers and students, about that. But then comes the discrepancy. While 79.7% of students rated themselves as very proficient or extremely proficient in communication, only 46.9% of employers rated students at those levels. So those numbers seem to suggest, while employers and students are agreeing on how important communication is, there's a discrepancy over what does that really mean, right? What is professional communication? So we're going to go over some key aspects of it with you here today to, again, help you as you present yourself as a professional, both in college and in career. Okay, so let's look at written communication first. And this is really your first opportunity to make a professional impression on the reader through your written words only. Right? Like if you are writing your cover letter, your resume, before an employer ever sees you, hears you, meets you, they get your words on paper. And that happens so much through email too, in these situations where it's your written word that is really giving the impression that you're giving to your audience. But why is there such a disconnect, right, between what employers and students see as professional communication? I think when we're talking about written communication, especially, technology plays a big role, right? We're so used to today communicating through texts and chats and comments online. And it's important to remember when you're writing professionally, like through email or those resumes and cover letters that we talked about, that you have to follow those formal writing rules and that you're not going to be writing like you do in those informal kind of texts that we send to a more personal audience. And even if, because our world is so digital now, if you are communicating with your instructors or work colleagues, supervisors in a more text-like situation, like on a Teams chat or something, you're going to adjust that, right, than how you would communicate with a more personal audience, like a friend or family member. So let's look at an example email here. This is a made-up email, but it's similar to emails that I've seen before. I think Jason said too. So this is an email from a student to an instructor that we've made up here. So it says, "Hey, Jason, I'm confused about that bio study guide thing. I mean, I heard what you said in class, but I don't really know what you want. And when is it due? Hope you can help me out, man, because I really can't drop this class, It'd be cool if you could have some patience and give me an extension." Okay. So this may be an extreme example, right? It is, but it combines a lot of problems that students sometimes do in their emails. I was an English teacher, and even English teachers get emails like this from students. Jason, I think you too can admit to that, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, because being I was in the classroom as well. And sometimes, when you develop those relationships with your students, your students seem to forget sometimes that, hey, I am communicating still with a professional. And you end up sometimes getting emails like such. But it's always important to remember that no matter who you're talking to, especially via email, in the professional world, you always want to make sure that you are continually to communicate that way. There was something that someone said in the chat about being able to read the room, and know your actual audience, right? So even though you may be comfortable with your instructor, it's still always, you still always want to err on the side of communicating professionally, because you never know what leads this individual may have for you later on in your professional career. So yeah.
Yes, perfect. Thanks, Jason. Yeah. And I think you want to think about what you are trying to get out of it, right? When you're emailing your instructor, like in this case, it looks like the student might want an extension, but I don't know that
Mhm.
they're making a case for that, right? They might not even get a
Yeah.
reply. I've heard teachers too say that if they get emails like this, they don't even reply to the student. They wait for the student to come talk to them, and then they say, I'm not replying to something that's written
Yeah.
unprofessionally. So you might even not even get an answer back. And I think that's a big part of professional communication, is to be motivated to communicate in a professional way, because that's how you get what you want. You get the instructions or the extension or the job eventually, right? So you want to think about what kind of impression you're giving to the recipient of your email. And if my written communication is unprofessional, my reader might make judgments about me, like I'm rude or lazy, or I don't really care about this class or that job. And that is not the message I'm trying to convey, right? So you have to think about that as you're composing your emails. So let's start by just identifying some specific things that this student has done wrong. And I know there's a lot, but like go ahead and put in the chat the first things you notice about what's wrong about this, or even why it's wrong. Whatever you think, go ahead and help us identify those specifics.
Yeah, and someone has already mentioned in the chat, no slang in professional writing. So I think someone picked up on slang there.
Yes.
Always, it's very casual. Someone is saying, yeah, I agree. Um, Subject, greeting, signature, needs a subject
Yes.
line. Yeah.
Perfect. All good things. Yes.
Proper
Yeah.
grammar, punctuation. Yes.
Yep. Those things definitely matter. And yeah, you're right about oh, what was one that you said that? Oh, about it being casual. Yeah, because if you
Yeah,
read
being
that, it
casual.
doesn't sound like this person is talking to their instructor, right? It sounds like maybe this is just to a
Exactly.
friend.
Yeah. And that when somebody wrote proper grammar and punctuation, that kind of reminds me of one of my English teachers when I was in college. He was a stickler for knowing when and how to use a comma, because a lot of people sometimes fall short on that knowledge. So
Mhm.
he was a stickler on that. And yeah, proper grammar and punctuation is very important when it comes to these written communications.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Great ideas.
capitalization,
Hmm.
formal words, better subject line. Yeah, subject line is not the best. We can
Hmm.
all agree to that one. Some instructors, like my colleague Justine said, some instructors may not even read that. Help.
Hmm.
That's too vague
Hmm.
of a subject line there.
Perfect. Thank you, guys. You are hitting all on the important stuff. And again, a lot of times these are things that we know. We just have to remind ourselves to be doing it, right? So that's why it's good to kind of review these things. So how can we be sure we're crafting professional emails? And you can keep putting your ideas in there in the chat and read what your peers are
Mhm.
commenting too. But we'll go forward with some email etiquette tips here. So some basic tips. A lot of you hit on all these already. First, put important information on the subject line. We talked about how that one does not look good, might not even get read. But you want to briefly give the purpose of your email right in that subject line. And definitely don't leave the subject line blank. A lot of email apps now are actually helpful. If you forget to put a subject line, it'll ask you, are you sure you want to send it with a subject or without a subject? And no, you don't ever want to send it without a subject, unless maybe you're emailing yourself and you don't care. But the other one is the greeting. You guys pointed that out too. You want to make sure that you've got a formal greeting for formal emails. And, if you are on a first name basis with someone like a colleague, you can say, hi, Jason, give that greeting still. Otherwise, use the titles. I think someone put that in there, use Dr., Mr., Mrs. With the last name rather than the first name. And, you can find out how the person likes to be addressed. I always tell students, look at your instructor's the syllabus or Blackboard, either one. How does your instructor like to be addressed? Because some are Dr. somebody, and you want to refer to them that way if that's how they want to be referred. But, you can look at Blackboard or the syllabus for a clue on that. And if you're not sure if you're on a first name basis with someone or not, default to more formal. Just use their title and last name. But be clear and concise with your message, having that formal but friendly tone, making sure your purpose is clear. What are you trying to get, answered? Is it a question or you want to inform the reader of something? Make sure that purpose is clear. And the things you all put in there, the capitalization, punctuation, grammar, paying attention, all that, avoiding the slang and abbreviations, exactly. And just like you begin with that greeting, you're going to end with that closing, sign your name, but still don't hit send yet, right? Go back and reread it again and make sure that everything is correct and just the way you want it done. And if it's a really important email, you can even read out loud. We tell people that when they're working on papers. You might have heard that proofreading technique before. You can do that for emails too. Read it out loud to catch your mistakes, or even copy and paste it into, Word or Google Docs for those read aloud features to hear it read to you. And then speaking of tech tools, pay attention to your spelling and grammar enablers. Make sure that that's working, or even plug it into something like Grammarly, again, if it's super important and you want to make sure that it's just right. Okay, so let's revisit that initial message from that student and see what a more professional example might be. So this one, you see we've got a different subject line now, questions on Bio 168 study guide, more specific. Jason knows when he's looking at it what kind of the student's looking for right from the subject line. And now we took away that, hey, Jason, we got, hello, Mr. Haskins, I hope you are doing well. I'm a student in your Monday, Wednesday Bio 168 class, and I'm working on the study guide that you assigned, but I'm having some trouble understanding some of the concepts in the section on the muscular system. I know that you have office hours today, but I'm not free at that time. However, I'm available tomorrow after 1 o'clock and all day on Friday. Do you have availability? Okay, they go on asking their questions. Also, I looked on Blackboard, but I did not find a due date for the study guide. Will it be due at our next class meeting on Monday? I appreciate your time and I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks, Justine Price O'Neill. Okay, so you can see very different than that first one, but you do want to make sure that you're hitting all those things, right? So remember, for professional written communication, but especially in this case with emails, you want to have that clear subject line, the formal greeting, formal friendly tone, state that purpose, clearly, your closing, proofread, for all those errors at the end. And I think it can be a good idea too to, if possible, type up your emails on your computer rather than on your phone, even though you can email from your phone, and that's good if you need to and it's convenient. But if it's a formal email, you're less likely to go into that text speech on the computer versus if you're, actually like you're texting it, so I think that can be a good thing, is set yourself up to do a formal written situation. And another thing to think about is try to not attempt those professional emails when you're overly frustrated or upset, right? Because those feelings can convey through your written words. And, when you're in that zone, I've had students who I've been working with them and they are frustrated with a project and they, have questions that I say, well, you'll have to ask your instructor about specifically what they want if you're not sure. And they're like, okay. And they get the computer and they're like, hey, blah, blah, blah. And they're all upset and they're telling it. And I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Like that you can get it out that way. And then you want to go back and be like, okay, let me fix my greeting. And then sometimes I say too, like, maybe take a break. Like, let's just talk about it in a minute. Let's take a breath, go walk around, get something to drink, get a snack, calm yourself down so that you can enter that formal writing situation. Just like you wouldn't want to, be overly frustrated when you're talking one-on-one with someone, getting to that space where you can calm it down is, can be helpful too. So, okay.
Yeah,
So
and
hopefully
I
that gives you,
actually
go ahead,
was
Jason.
I was actually, when you mentioned about proofreading, that made me think that a lot of times, especially nowadays when we are creating emails, we sometimes are in a hurry and we're typing and our brain is moving faster than our fingers, and we may have thought we put a word in that we didn't. So that proofreading is very, very important, because I know that I've been guilty of it myself. I've tried to compose an email and I thought everything was right and hit send, and I look at it and I'm like, oh man, I left
Mhm.
out one word or something.
Yeah.
And so it's always important to proofread. And another thing, Justine, that you mentioned about on the cell phones. I know that, because we have our phones with us constantly, it is very tempting to kind of just quickly email from the phone. However, we know that autocorrect is not always our best friend on the telephone. So it's always probably best to, especially a professional email, to respond once you get to a computer so that you're able to collect your thoughts and compose it properly. But yeah, that email is much, much, much better than the previous one.
Yes, perfect. Thank you guys so much. To the great stuff in the chat here. I see your work is a reflection of who you are. That's definitely the way you want to present yourself in your written communication. So hopefully that gives you some good tips and reminders to have at the forefront for as far as your formal writing rules to again present that professional image through your written word. Let's just briefly look at a few aspects of oral communication too, also important in the professional world. While much of our communication now is written, especially when we're on our devices and things like that, you do want to, of course, present a professional image of yourself through the words you speak as well. So doing so, again, is important because of the impression that you're trying to make on that professional audience, but also to avoid any potential conflict or miscommunication too. So in, again, college and career, there's opportunities for video calls like this on Teams, typical phone calls, in-person meetings, and in all these situations, you want to communicate appropriately, professionally. If it's a meeting, you want to show up on time, avoid distractions like your food or phone, and communicate professionally. So what are some tips for that? Well, let's look at a few things here. One good one is to pause and think before you talk. Right. Remember, it's not always best to say the first thing that comes to mind, especially if it's, a event or a frustration that maybe is inappropriate for this particular audience, a professional audience. So, yeah, take a minute to stop and think about it. Um, and then, ask yourself, is this important enough for me to share right now? And if it is, maybe still take that pause to think, how do I want to express this just right? Which leads to number 2 there, making sure that you're using respectful words, tone, and body language, maintaining eye contact, uncrossing your arms, sitting or standing up straight, show you're engaged. And then finally, be a good listener. That's a key part of communication too, listening to convey your professionalism. So when employers say that new hires struggle with those communication skills, a lot of times what they're referring to is that trouble with listening effectively too. So, that's an important skill for following instructions and understanding what's required of you. And to be a good listener, you want to think about things like asking questions, repeating back what you've heard for confirmation, and even taking notes if it's, that's a situation that would be important as well. So let's go ahead and pause before we move on from communication, and go ahead and share in the chat, or if you want to unmute and tell us what this has you thinking about so far. Any key takeaways about professional communication, or how you see it working or mattering for you personally, something you're going to start or stop doing, or anything about showing professionalism through written or spoken words. Let us know what's on your mind.
Yeah, someone put in the chat, Silas, yes, body language is very important. Yes, we know a lot of communication can be oral, but about 80% of what we communicate is nonverbal, how our facial expressions and, the body language that we use. So yeah, that's very, very important. Having your own questions ready for your employees. Yeah, we're going to touch on that as we move into the interview. But yeah, that's actually very important there. Someone else said, so showing body language, because maybe English is a second language. So it may be a little bit difficult there, but yeah, showing your body language is very important.
Yeah, great stuff, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you. Perfect. Okay, so keep sharing as those ideas come to you, but we're going to move along into some professional behaviors. So some specific qualities, behaviors that are important ways, powerful ways for you to showcase your professionalism in the way that you act. So, and I hope you see as we're progressing through this presentation too, and you're thinking about these ideas, that professionalism doesn't mean changing who you are, right? Your core identity should be the same, and it should shine through in professional settings like in school and at work. You want to bring your unique self into those situations, but you also want to be intentional about the way you conduct yourself for professional audiences specifically. So we can have confidence that we're respectful, dependable, responsible people, but the way we show that might differ when we're in a professional situation rather than with our friends and family that we're more comfortable and personal with, right? So I think it helps too to think of professionalism like an unspoken message. It's spoken in the communication that we were just talking about, but in all of these other ways, it's an unspoken message that you're trying to convey to your audience about the impression you want them to have of you. Or another way to think about it is what type of employee does the employer want or value? And is that what you're trying to showcase there? And it pays to be observant here because you want to pay attention to explicit rules like dress code or social media policy or other rules at work. But then there's also more subtle understandings of what's expected of us in professional spaces. And you can follow the example of your leaders and supervisors in that way too. So we'll look at some key areas that are universally important parts of professionalism, and yeah, take a look at those, and hopefully thinking about them will give you kind of some action areas to focus on as you think about delivering these professional messages that you want to convey and displaying that professional image of yourself.
Yeah.
So go ahead,
And
Jason.
there was a question in the chat which
Mm-hmm.
actually coincides with the first one there. David put, how, in general, any general advice for handling conflicts with coworkers? Yeah, how do professionals act, right? Because we know it's just the way of the world. Just because you are acting professional does not necessarily mean that everyone else is, right? So how do you deal with conflict with coworkers? Um, well, there's several different ways that you can address that issue. The first way is you want to make sure that you can address the issue with that coworker if that person is willing to sit down and talk. Now, depending on the conflict and what it is, you may want to escalate that more to your supervisor, but you definitely want to keep the lines of communication open with your supervisor and even also with that coworker to understand what it is that causes conflict, because oftentimes we know that sometimes there can be outside factors that, people unfortunately bring into the work environment. Maybe something is going wrong at home, and, instead of trying to compartmentalize and, keep it as such, sometimes people will allow that to move over or run into the work, and that could be a reason for causing the conflict. So yeah, diffusing the situation someone mentioned. Yeah, acknowledging the person's frustration. Yeah, a lot of times you can just showing empathy, as Justine mentioned earlier about the soft skills. One of the soft skills is showing empathy, making sure that you understand and put yourself into the other person's shoes. Everyone has things going on outside of work, and sometimes, like I mentioned, that those things can oftentimes spill over into work, which is, not a good thing. But, encouraging, the coworker to talk it out, or try to find the root of that frustration. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good stuff, Jason, and everybody else contributing with the chat. That is a hard one with dealing with conflict, is that you can see that you can only really be in control of yourself, right? So you can
Mm-hmm.
manage your professional behaviors and impression. But that is when it gets tricky, is when you have to deal with others who maybe aren't being professional. But But yeah, so let's look at some of these behaviors, and we can come back to these ideas too. But one big one is, of course, being focused. So, this means giving your full attention, being engaged, avoiding distractions, taking notes if you need to. And with distractions, we know we live in a very distracting world, mostly because of all this technology, which is wonderful. It's how we're able to do this right now today. But it also can be distracting when it's not a helpful part of technology, or when we need to be focused and we have things that are easily distracting us. And not only does, if you are just scrolling on your phone or browsing the web when you're supposed to be focusing on something for work or school, that can make you less productive, but also it can give that impression that you aren't interested, or, can come across as rude or unprofessional. And again, we want to think about that image that we're trying to present. So, thinking about avoiding tech distractions, and feel free to drop in the chat if you have ideas for this, but it's like, of course you should have your phone silenced. When you're working, you can put it out of sight, put it face down, don't even have it tempting you. And you can, be in do not disturb mode. One thing I did not too long ago was I would notice that if I did, my phone, goes off and I do have like an email that I need to look at, or a phone call that's coming, or a text from someone that I need to respond to. And then you see all those other apps, right? They do this to us on purpose, right? They give us all these apps on that home screen, and you pick that up and you're like, oh, but what's going
Yep.
on here? What's going on there? And I'm clicking, and then I'm like, what am I doing? What was I doing? And now I'm all distracted, and it was throwing me off. So what I did was take all of my like time wasting apps, social media and games and other stuff I don't need to be doing, all that stuff I moved to my second or even third screen, not that home screen that I would see every time I pick my phone up, because they give us those notifications too, right? You see that little red one, and you got to see who someone liked my tweet, right? So you got to see that.
Yeah.
But if you move that and you don't see it, it actually, I was just curious. I was like, I wonder if this will make a difference. But iPhones will track your screen time. And that first week, my screen time went down some, and then the next week a little bit more, and that third week even a little bit more, as I just got out of that habit. And so I think you can really see how just like a small adjustment like that can make a big difference overall. So, thinking about evaluating your tech stuff as far as avoiding distractions can be helpful. Taking notes to show your engagement. Of course, we do this in school, but it's also good to do at work, making sure that if you're in an important meeting, you're taking notes, and using strategies that work for you, like color coding or visuals or outlining. And be prepared, if whether you want to do it on paper with pen, or if you want to have a Word doc or Google Doc open when you're going into a important meeting. If you like apps, OneNote is a good one through Microsoft, and I think I saw on Sarah's organizational skills coming up later in the breakout sessions, she's going to be focusing on that. So if you don't know about OneNote and you want to get organized with note taking, you might want to check out that too. But basically, showing that professional engagement through avoiding your distractions, taking notes, again, projecting that image that you want to through your focus. All right. And
Yeah.
then number 2, or did you have something else to say, Jason?
Yeah, well, first, thank you, Silas, for reposting that link. Somebody got kicked out, and then they couldn't see the video, but thank you, Silas, for reposting that. And then someone also mentioned about being engaged, and there was a comment about, a lot of people aren't engaged anymore because they're on their phones. So yeah, it's always good to, you know, be mindful of the fact that, your phone or our phones are distracting to us. Because again, in the world that we live in now, it's everything is readily available at our fingertips. And, sometimes we just absent-mindedly, pick up the phone and start scrolling and looking at different things. One thing that we have in our household, my household, is when we're out to dinner, especially when we're out to dinner, while we're waiting on the food to arrive, we tell everybody to put their phones away, because it's very easy to just pick up your phone and start playing a game or looking at social media or something like that. So we make it a note to tell all the kids, and even their mom and I, we will put we put our phones away, and we engage, and we, play some type of game at the table or something of that nature, just to, become more engaging with each other. Because you're right, as people use their phones more and more, people become less likely to engage, in person. So, yeah.
Yep. Perfect. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
All right, let's see. Let's go to the next one, which is about showing self-reliance. So um, for this one, things that you want to think about, of course, being on time, being productive, so important. You want to show that you're responsible for yourself, basically, and be trusted to do what's required of you. And you want to use your resources. In college, you have your syllabus for each class with all that important information about due dates and materials and resources. And it's a good idea to print that out if you're not doing it already. Keep that either printed and in your folder or binder for that class, or at least just bookmark it on your computer for easy access. It's pretty easy to find in Blackboard usually if you can get there, but even bookmark it faster or easier for you so that you can check it regularly and reference it before asking questions. And questions are good, but it's also good to kind of research before and see if you can get that question answered even faster and on your own if you can. And in your career as well, searching briefly, using your resources to find an answer is an effective practice to show your self-reliance and professionalism. Now, if you can't find the answer after brief search, do ask those questions because you want to be clear on expectations. And then finally, you know, being self-reliant means setting professional goals for yourself. The best way to do this, like it says there, is SMART goals, that acronym. You probably heard of it. I think that a lot of you guys have done this is it the ACA course where you set SMART goals, making sure they're specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based. And so you might have practice with creating those, but it's a good kind of rule to remember when you're creating goals so that you can measure your success and make sure it's realistic and that you're able to meet it, relevant to your work, and put a timestamp on this. Is this something I want to do within a week, a month, a few months? But basically setting goals in this way holds you accountable and makes you more successful in achieving your goals. And that's a key trait of being a professional, is showing that self reliance. All right. And then one last thing here. While self-reliance is important, it doesn't mean doing everything all alone, right? That's not what we're saying, but being productive and successful also requires working with people. So one last professional quality we'll talk about here is being a team player or collaborating with others. And when we think of collaboration, we think teamwork, working together to achieve a common goal, right? And this is clearly so important in so many areas of life, but especially at work and in school as well. So you want to think about, some of the things we've already discussed about communication with working in with a group, but also things like, emotional intelligence and respecting people who might be different from you. And the best way to kind of work on these skills is practice them through getting involved. And you may already be doing this. So, kind of reflect and think, are you doing this or could you do it more? But at work, you can join committees or other opportunities to work in groups. You can participate in volunteer work. And in college right now, there are so many opportunities right here at Wake Tech to get involved with clubs and organizations. There's more than 50 student activities and more than 40 student clubs, plus all the volunteer and leadership opportunities. And it's all on the website. You can search for them on there. But getting involved with something that's interesting to you personally or professionally can help you practice these skills of working with others. So if you like books or movies, there's a book club, there's a film club. You like chess, there's a chess club. If you are in accounting, there's an accounting club. So there's so many different things. And you can search, like I said, on the website and kind of filter by, area of interest or category. So they have like by academic program, culture, identity, hobbies, special interest, and so many other things. But the key is finding something that is interesting to you, something you like, and then work on those collaboration skills to hopefully grow within your personal or academic interests, as well as working on those team player skills while you're at it. And don't worry if you think, that maybe you're a shyer, more introverted person and, clubs aren't your thing. Like we said, these team player skills are important for everyone and in every career. I was recently working with a student who was working on his application to transfer to NC State, and he wrote an essay, one of his transfer application essays was about an obstacle, and his obstacle was about feeling shyer and introverted. And he decided to join a club. He joined the club that was related to his academic program at Wake Tech. And through that, he was introduced to, all kinds of different people, career fairs, and other events professionally through that club. And then he eventually landed a job through the contacts he made there. And then he wrote about that whole experience in a essay to transfer to a four-year university, about the ways that he grew and developed those collaboration skills. So definitely don't underestimate yourself or the power of this kind of involvement, and remember to include any of the participation that you do and stuff like that on your resume, and show how you foster those collaboration skills.
Yeah.
All right, go
And
ahead.
someone also mentioned in the chat that if there aren't any clubs that you are interested in that you see there, but you have an idea, you can create your own club. As far as for Wake Tech, so there may be, and you may have an idea for a club that doesn't exist yet. If that's the case, you can go through the necessary paperwork. I'm not sure what the paperwork is, what that entails rather, but you can create your own club. So
Yeah,
that's
that's a
also a
great
good thing.
Yeah, great idea. Another great thing to put on a resume, I bet. And also,
Oh yes.
yeah, then you're talking teamwork stuff, and you're talking about leadership. So, yeah, great idea. And then you get to have the club that you want, and that's how those things grow. So, awesome ideas, guys. All right. Anything else on the stuff about engagement and self-reliance or team players? We'll turn it over for a shift with some other topics here with Jason. If there's nothing else in the chat at this point, Jason.
No, nothing else. There's a link in there for those that, want to create their own club or have the club information. Someone just put a link in there. So you can click on that if you like, but I don't see anything else. So we can move on to the next portion, which
Perfect.
now, we've talked about, your written and oral communication. We've talked about professional behavior. So we've toned those up, and now it's time to interview. Well, we know that interviewing is, your foot in the door to your potential employer. As I was doing some research on the interview, I kind of put this little last line in there, but you only get one shot at impressing them. And I immediately thought of, this is probably before many of you all time, but I immediately thought of Eminem and the song Lose Yourself, and, you only get one shot, which is very true when it comes to interviewing. So you always want to make sure that you're putting your best foot forward in those interviews, as you are, interviewing for for a potential employer. And so the first thing that we always want to talk about when we're interviewing is, if we can go to the next slide, talking about dress or our attire. So now when we talk about the attire for the interview, what you want to do is do some research. The research doesn't always have to pertain to, the company itself, because you always want to make sure prior to the interview that you're doing research to make sure that you have some questions to ask, which we'll talk about later. But you also want to do some research on how the company presents itself. How does it present its workplace culture? How the employees are, right? That can tailor your interview attire. You always want to always dress professional, but depending on the company, you may not have to wear a business suit to the interview. You can maybe be slightly more casual with a jacket and a button-down shirt. So you always want to make sure that you do your research on how this company presents itself. One thing that most people probably heard this before about how Google and Facebook and how their work environment is. It's more casual and relaxed and laid back. So there, I mean, if you're interviewing there, first of all, kudos. But then if you're interviewing there, you also, you want to do some research on how they dress there. If they're a little more casual. Now, I'm not saying you should show up in jeans, but you don't necessarily have to show up in a three-piece suit, right? So always do your research on your company or potential employer, right? As I'm talking about this, that takes us to some of the do's and don'ts for the interviews. So when we talk about these interview skills, there's a lot of things that, when we go on interviews, sometimes we do and we don't even realize that we're doing it. So here are just a few of the do's and don'ts when it comes to interviewing. First, we always want to make sure, we had this conversation about body language earlier, but you always want to project a positive and confident body language, right? So that means you don't want your arms folded and things of that nature. You want an inviting body language. You want to portray that confidence to the interviewer, right? Create a dialogue. Don't let it be a one-sided conversation. Now, obviously, we know the interviewer has, a certain agenda that he or she must follow and certain questions that they, want to touch on, but you want to create a dialogue as opposed to just making it a one-sided, interview or just answering the questions. So always you want to avoid those one-way conversations where, the person is just asking the question and you're answering. You always want to try to create that dialogue. In addition to that, you always want to, when we talked about written and oral communication, be mindful, stop and think, right, before answering the questions. You don't want to answer, quickly, and you don't want to answer out of panic, right? You want to take some time to listen to the question, stay relaxed, listen to the question. If it's a two-part, three-part question, it's okay to ask them to repeat the question. You can also take notes, right? No one is going to look at you badly if you jot down some notes while you're on the interview, right? So you always want to make sure that you're listening carefully and staying focused, staying relaxed. That research component, making sure you do not only the research for the attire, but you also want to ask questions. You want to do some research on the company so that towards the end of the interview that you have some questions to ask. You never want to just wing it, right? When you're in an interview. Now, as I'm talking about this, it kind of reminds me of a story that one of my colleagues had mentioned before, that one of the things that you should not do when it comes to asking questions on the interview. So one of my colleagues had mentioned to me that, he had went on a job interview, and this was, years ago, back in the 80s, which my daughter, I have an 8-year-old, sidebar, my daughter asked like 2 weeks ago, what were people like in the 80s? And I'm like, what does, but anyway, so he mentioned how he went on this job interview, and it was in the mall. So, and he felt that, he was dressed, appropriately for the interview, and we get to the end of it, and the lady that was interviewing him asked if he had any questions, and he was, I guess he mentioned that he was, fresh out of college at that stage, and he, just inadvertently, I'm guessing, asked the interviewer if she was married. And needless to say, he didn't get the job. So you want to make sure that you are asking appropriate questions and asking the right questions geared towards the company. Doing your research. So you don't want to wing it when it comes to the interviews, because again, the interviewers, they've seen probably, hundreds, maybe a few thousands, depending on the company, applicants. So you always want to make sure that whatever you're doing sets you apart, from the next individual. So you want to project that positive body language. You want to avoid the slouching, staying focused on the topic. Avoid changing the topic from time to time. I mean, it's okay to bring it back, but you don't want to completely steer away from the topic or from the question that was asked to you. And also remember to creating that dialogue between you and the interviewer or the panel, because that also shows professionalism.
Yeah, a
Now,
couple,
go
just
ahead.
real quick, Jason, a couple of things. Good stuff in the chat. Someone has 2 interviews coming up in the next 2 weeks for 2 different companies. That's awesome. And then we have some people with some questions, good questions to ask. What does success or a home run in this role look like at 30 days, 90 days, a year? So you know their expectations.
Mhm.
Another good one, what are some current projects the department needs support in? Those are great questions. And then a question for us, Jason says, how do you handle an interview when it's a panel of people? I find it's tougher and can be a bit awkward. What do you
Yeah,
think
I
about
actually
interviewing for a panel?
Yeah, I actually just read that one. So when you're in a panel interview, yes, first of all, it can be intimidating when you have 3 or 4, maybe more individuals in the room with you, kind of firing questions off to you. But you want to also always remember to stay relaxed and make that eye contact with everyone in the room. That's going to be important in a panel interview. Making sure that you make that eye contact with each individual. Now, most of the time in a panel interview, um, you know, certain people will have certain questions. So you initially will start answering the question, making contact with that first person that asked that question, but you then will rotate and making eye contact with every individual on that panel. That's one good way that you can handle a panel interview. And also just remember to be yourself in the interview. You always want to go in relaxed. I can't say that enough, because a lot of people, when they get to interviews, they panic. And rightfully so, because you're talking to individuals that you don't know, and you desperately probably want this job, or you need this job for whatever reason. So yeah, that's a lot of pressure on you when you're doing an interview, but you always want to make sure that you're being yourself and that you're staying focused, and just take a minute to process the questions first before you answer. Those are always good things.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's always good. You may make sure you recognize everyone that's on the panel is very important. Yeah, so you always want to, and taking notes is important. I don't have it up there, but you can jot down, the names of individuals on the panel so that you can, recognize them towards the end and, address them as such. So those are all good things.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you guys for participating. And yeah, I think, as Jason has on there, to not wing it, you can see that practicing all of this really helps, like having your questions prepared, having your key points that you want to make sure you get in, and even do some, role play with somebody else to practice what it sounds like to say your answers out loud, will help you in the moment. All
Yeah,
right.
absolutely. And another thing with the interview is make sure that you practice first. And a lot of times, the more interviews you go on, the better you are at them. So I will always tell my students, um, to never turn down an interview. always take an interview, because even if you are, not interested in the job, the interview itself is practice for future interviews further on down the road. So it's always good to make sure that you practice those things. And, just like everything, the more you practice at it, the better you become at it. So yeah, those are all good things. Knowing people's names, those are all very important. So we've touched on the interview. Now it's time to look at, what we've talked about a little bit earlier, the technology and social media. Now, yeah, social media presence can be good, right? It's good because it can be used for building your personal brand. It can grow your network. It kind of gives a lot of employers an insight, or prospective employers kind of gives them a glimpse into your personality, because that's what we showcase most of the time on social media. We showcase our personality, depending on your career field. Again, building that personal brand, it can be used to create and grow your business. We know that a lot of times now, individuals will promote, via social media, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, whatever the case may be, promoting their business, right? And you can grow your network that way, because you can reach, hundreds and thousands of people that you may not have been able to reach, had you not had this social media presence. However, we also know that social media can be a downfall, so you want to make sure that you are avoiding um, the pitfalls of social media, right? So now when we talk about the pitfalls of social media, these are some things that we want to be mindful of. And as we, for those of us that are parents, it's very important that we, not only teach and remember this for ourselves, but also teach our children, because, technology is what they're going to be using, to further on their careers and things of that nature, and schools and education and things. So you always want to avoid oversharing personal information when you're online, or when you have this social media presence, right? Also, make sure that you avoid trash talking employers, uh, because believe it or not, way more employers now are checking people's social media than before. So you always want to keep in the back of your mind, that personal brand that you have, or that you're trying to portray. So you don't want to trash talk your employers, because even if it's a previous employer and you're not working there anymore, someone at your current job, or maybe even in the future, they can see that, and like, okay, well, if this person has said this about this company, what are they going to say about us when they're no longer with us? Or what are they going to say about our work environment when they're no longer with us? I can remember, I had a student that was going on a clinical site for medical assistant, and the student had a bad experience at the clinical site, per her, and she decided to broadcast this on social media. Well, unbeknownst to her, the company actually enjoyed having her at their facility, and was ready to offer her a position, until they went to her social media or Facebook page, and saw that she was unhappy with them. So you always want to be mindful of that. You know, Another thing, sharing sensitive company information, you want to avoid that. Um, I know that there's a lot of, nowadays it's, when you get excited, especially when you graduate from college, you get excited about, hey, I got this new job, whether I'm a nurse, a doctor, or, whatever it is, you get excited about, hey, I'm entering in my career field. Um, I had someone before, a student before that um, got a position, and we know how people become excited and they are posting, hey, this, look at my new position and look at my new office and what have you. And unbeknownst to them, there was some personal information from a student, not a student, from a patient that was nearby that actually got into the video, and so that person ended up losing their job. So you always want to be mindful of that. So it's always best to err on the side of caution and, leave your cell phones in your locker or in your purse or things of that nature, so you're not even tempted to use them while you're at work. So those are some things that we can, touch on or talk about as we are um, looking at the social media presence and the use of technology. Um, so we're gonna
Yeah, it looks
pause
like,
here.
yeah, I
Yeah,
think
I
some
was gonna
people
say
are
I
talking in
see.
the chat, yeah, about connecting on LinkedIn, and Connie has put in the link for Wake Tech. So that's a great way, is finding connections there.
Yeah, yeah, you definitely can connect with individuals via LinkedIn. Also be mindful when we're talking about the pitfall. Um, you know the world we live in now, it's very easy to want to share your personal opinion on certain things, whether it be political or religion. um, Depending on your position, you always want to think first before you post something, because we all know that once it gets in the digital world of social media or what have you, once it's out there for the rest of your life and its life and what have you. So you always want to make sure that you're thinking before you post, as far as where you want to be, years down the road. So always think. Now, a lot of times we know that, people can use and have a personal account and a professional account. And, oftentimes I've heard that, well, I have this personal account and then, I have my professional account. But, sometimes be mindful that they're not always isolated, which means that just because, you have a personal or professional Facebook or professional Instagram or what have you, that your current coworkers or employees or employers rather can't find your personal accounts, right? You always want to make sure that you are aware and know how to use your privacy setting. If you have, two accounts, your professional and personal account, you want to make sure that you are using those privacy settings to their advantage. They're there for a reason. Think about that brand identity. Again, that all goes back to, the comment that I was talking about, when you're posting something based on your personal feelings. Um, I can remember an incident where someone had posted something on Facebook about something political a couple years ago with the former President Trump. And, she got into a debate with somebody else, and the person ends up bad mouthing their business and saying, hey, you don't want to go to these people's business because they support this or they feel this way. So you always want to think before you post, how is this going to affect my job? How is this going to affect me later on down the road? um, Oftentimes people say, if you wouldn't want your grandmother to read it, then you shouldn't post it. Yeah, that's probably a good strategy to use sometimes, but again, you always want to think first before you post anything online, because once it's out there, it's out there. And yeah, let's not get too distracted by social media and friends. I remember somebody just put that into the chat. So yeah, oftentimes social media can end up being a distraction. It can be good, but it also can be bad. So always keep that in mind. Now, as we're moving forward here, any questions about that or anything? I don't see anything else in the chat about that just yet. But we're going to talk about now, as we come to a close, on creating this professional plan, right? So all of the areas that we kind of touched on, consider these areas where you can grow and improve to kind of become a better professional or your best professional self, right? So here's a little assessment that we put together for you all, and you can jot the answers down on paper or you can put them in the chat, whichever you feel comfortable. But we got a group of questions that we want to ask. So the first set,
Yeah, I think,
and you can,
real quick, just so rate yourself like sometimes, always, or never on each of these things. So sometimes, always,
yeah,
or never. First thing that comes to your mind.
yeah. So question one, I display a positive attitude, professional demeanor through my actions and words. I readily accept and incorporate professional feedback. I value diversity and treat all people, regardless of differences, with respect. I'm an active and effective listener, and I demonstrate self-reliance and take initiative in my work.
Okay, so yeah, sometimes, always, or never on those. Don't think too hard, and you only have
Yeah,
to do this for yourself. But all right, here's some more.
some more
I'm
here.
confident. Yeah, I'm confident in my interviewing skills and have an updated resume. I display a professional virtual image online. I actively build my professional network and participate in networking opportunities. I am mentally engaged in my work and able to avoid distractions. I am on time and productive when it comes to my professional commitments. So sometimes, always, or never on those.
Then the last set, I can think critically and solve problems effectively. I am skilled in delivering a professional message in written and oral communication. I am a team player and collaborate well with others in professional group settings. I have a strong organizational skills. I am flexible and able to adapt to new situations that occur at work. Oh, wow, look at that. Somebody actually took something very similar to this assessment.
Oh, a similar kind of a set. Oh, okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, so that's a effective interview practice then. They're already asking you those things.
Exactly.
Okay. But yeah, I think what we're thinking with this is, kind of creating a professional plan and really just participating in a self-assessment like this. It makes sense that someone who's thinking about hiring you would want you to participate in a self-assessment like this, because having that self-awareness is an important skill for identifying strengths and weaknesses and areas where that you can improve. So and this is a part of work too. There are times when you have to accept feedback from colleagues or supervisors about ways that you can improve, and it's not always easy to do, but it's how you grow into that best professional version of yourself, right? So think about this now. Look at those areas that you rated, and think about your strengths first. What are things that you always do? So these are 15 professional behaviors that we compiled, and what are areas that you are already doing all the time? That's great. Reflect on that first. And then, think there too, are there areas that surprised you or got you thinking? And then once you kind of look at your strengths, kind of think about those places that were a never or a sometimes, which is, it's not bad, it's not wrong. It's just this is an area where you know that you can focus in on, because we've talked about a lot of stuff today. And there might be parts where you're like, oh yeah, I got that down. And there might be other things where you're like, oh, I could improve in this area. And that's the idea of having that self-awareness. So with those first five, if you had kind of some sometimes or nevers in those, you want to think about honing your professional image, right? So things like professional development and leadership opportunities that we were talking about, taking on new projects or training. Find a mentor, someone who has a little bit more experience that you can learn from and be guided by, and getting involved, as we were talking about earlier. All these things are ways that you're going to, develop that professional image. Um, let's see, in that second group, from 6 to 10, if you had some nevers or sometimes there, you want to think about making yourself more marketable. And I know we've got talk in the chat about interviews and things, so this is definitely something that would pertain to you. So practice those interview skills and make sure that you're updating your resume. LinkedIn, there's big chat about LinkedIn in the chat. Go ahead and get involved or get connected with your peers in that way. And other online networking opportunities like that, and building your network of professional contacts, and remembering that when you're in college, these are the people that you're meeting in this space. Your instructors or other advisors and things can be recommenders for you and references for you, right? So you want to build that network and keep contact information and keep good relationship with people who can, introduce you to opportunities going forward or serve as a reference for you to help you get that job. Okay, and then finally, that last group, if you had some things that you would want to work on in that last group, that's developing your soft skills, which is all the stuff that's about to come up in a few minutes here with all these breakout sessions for the rest of the afternoon and evening. So those topics that you see there are things that you're probably already hopefully signed up for. Well, I'm just going to come back up here so you can see what 11 through 15 was there, and see, is it the solving problems? Is it more about communication or collaborating, organizing, the adaptability stuff? What's an area you want to focus on? Maybe it's something you're already signed up for. If not, no worries. Everything is recorded and will be available for you over the next 30 days in the same spot online where you registered for the conference. So, but I think it's good to think about, what are areas where you can improve. So go ahead and make that action plan now. If you haven't already, see if you can jot down 2 things, whether it's from the self-assessment or something else that came to mind earlier, 2 things or more that you have learned or you're going to implement moving forward as part of your professional plan. So 2 things that you learned today. And if you feel comfortable, feel free to unmute or share in the chat what your goals are. And or any other questions or comments or ideas that have come to mind now. We've got just a few minutes before we break out into those other sessions.
Yeah. And there are some links for the other sessions for the next group of sessions that are starting at 1:30. There's some links posted here in the chat. You have the networking, problem solving and critical thinking, working within a group. Those are all next up at 1:30. So whichever one you're interested in. But yeah, so any questions? I think there was one question I saw. How do we put it on our resume? Is that referring to, how do you put, I don't know, how do we put what on our resume?
I think he means that we attended this conference, because I was wondering that
Oh,
too.
okay. That's a good question. How do we put this on a resume?
Or just these topics. It says, I mean, sometimes you can have a part on your resume of like, conferences attended or even just professional skills or qualities that are different from those technical skills that are in your job experience. So yeah, maybe look at different resume formats of what that might work, but you can definitely, plug those in there, put them in your cover letters. Yep, there's a comment here, all resumes should have a professional development section. So this would work under there. And yeah, we've got our website is down there at the bottom. If you haven't used the ILC before, definitely resume writing and cover letter writing and things like that are things that the Writing Center can help with too. If you want specific, more personalized feedback for yours in particular.
I have
But
a
yes,
quick question. I'm sorry,
go
I didn't
ahead.
mean to interrupt you. In regards to the other courses that are going on today, I know that some of them overlapped in timing. So I wanted to know how would we be able to go about receiving those recordings later on a later time or a later date, or how is it going to be distributed? Because I really want to go to the critical thinking one, but it overlaps with one of the other ones that's going on. So how could
Yes.
we get those?
Right. Yeah, I know that that is, some other students have brought that up as well, but they are all recorded and going to be available for you afterwards, within that Sketch website where you registered for the conference. The recordings will be in there for the next 30 days. So you will be able to, if you can't, maybe attend the ones live that you want to participate, within the chat or ask questions. And then, okay, yes, also James says the recordings will be posted on our website. So, and if you have any trouble accessing them, feel free to reach out to us and we'll get you connected there. But yeah, we want you to get all the information, lots of good stuff being talked about this afternoon. The 3 that are starting in 3 minutes are networking, problem solving and critical thinking, and working within a group. And those links are in the chat. If you scroll up just a little bit, you'll see that we've got those 3 links. So you can, if you have no more questions for us here, you can feel free to get connected to your next meeting. And I hope you guys really have an awesome rest of your day learning about all these topics. I know I'm going to be jumping into them as well.
Yes, absolutely.
And thank you so much for joining us for this
Thank
talk.
you, and have a nice day.
Thank
Thank
you.
you
Thank you so
guys
much.
so
I appreciate your
much.
time. Take care.
No problem. Thank you guys.
Yes, and it says the links are in your email as well. Thank you, James. Yes, so check your email if you want more of those contacts, but you'll find them there. Have fun, guys.
Thank